Everything is being influenced by code written by developers.
At some point, you're going to wake up and say, what the hell am I doing?
It's hard to believe. It's the largest group I've ever been in front of, I think.
We develop the future.
Hello everyone and welcome to the WeAreDevelopers live Angular Day. I am Benedikt and I'm so happy to have you all today. So why Angular, you might ask? Well, to put it simple, front-end frameworks grew more and more popular over the last few years. And to be honest, why shouldn't they? As they are very useful and can help you elevate your coding to the next level. So before we start with the session, I have some great news to share with you. As you already have seen in the teaser before the session, we are finally back with our World Congress in person starting mid-June in Berlin. So after the session, go to worldcongress.dev to get further information and get some tickets. Also, during the talks, please use the chat to your right to interact and to submit some questions, as we will have a short Q&A after each talk. But please keep in mind that we have a code of conduct. Be nice to each other. Here is a short video about it. So, right back to Angular, I would say. Today, we have three very special guests. And I would say, let's jump right to the first one. His name is Benedikt Starzengruber. He works as a front-end engineer at Celum. And as far as I'm informed, he's a real pro when it comes to programming Angular apps. Please welcome with me, Benedikt.
Yeah, hello, Benedikt.
Hello, Benedikt. Wonderful to have you. How are you today?
Thank you. I'm very fine. Ready to go.
So happy to hear this. Maybe you want to tell us about where you are joining us from?
Yeah, so I'm currently in my home office in Wels, that is in Upper Austria.
Oh, yes, I know it. Okay, so right back to the topic. What are we going to learn from you today?
Yeah, I just want to show you some smaller tips and tricks that you can maybe also use if you have an existing bigger code base. So you can also add them to this and you don't have to do a lot of refactorings, because as you know, if we have to introduce new libraries or change big best practices that we learn from conferences, it might not always be that easy. And with my talk, I want to give you a bit more chance to go into work tomorrow and really apply some stuff that you're going to see today.
Benedikt, that sounds awesome. And without further ado, I would say, stage is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so I already gave that introduction now, but let's do it again. So why am I giving this talk to you today? So there are a lot of things that you learn at a conference. You get new libraries, new frameworks, best practices, maybe you have new features, things like this. And then there is also a bubble with things that you really like from a technological perspective. And normally the overlap between these two is rather big. So because, yeah, You get to know the cool things at the conference. But then there is the third bubble here, which is the things that you can actually apply at work then afterwards. And maybe you have a big code base, maybe you have legacy code, maybe you have other teams which you need to align with. And so it's not always easy to just apply what you have learned. And my goal is now to give you smaller tips and tricks that you can add to your code base without changing much of your existing code. And so the goal is to just move this circle up a little bit so that the overlap is a bit more, and you can go to work tomorrow and hopefully apply one or two things that you're going to see today in this talk. So as already mentioned, I'm Benedikt Starzengruber. I'm working as a front-end engineer at Celum. We are creating products to manage the content of some big brands in Europe. So if you're interested in this, then either talk to me directly on my socials, or you can also go to our webpage. So let's start what we're going to do today. So we have this sample application here, which is just an art browser. So we have some art pieces, and you can scroll through them to just get some information. And I will use this example to give you some real-world use cases where you could apply some tips and tricks. So let's do that now. We have here our ticket, so we want to implement this art browser. And we have some requirements, and the first requirement that we get is, okay, we need to fetch the data somewhere and then show it in a list. And let's see how that could look like in our application. So somewhere we have a service, an art service or something like this, and there is a method that is called getArt. And we access here with the HTTP client from Angular a URL that gives us the art pieces. And the response will look something like this here. So we have an object. On this object, there's a data property. And then we have an array. And in the array, you have one object for each art piece. And there are a lot of information on each art pieces. So let's process this somehow. So the first thing that you normally want to do is we want to map our response to that data object. Then the second thing, let's say that this API is a bit sketchy. We sometimes maybe get a null or an undefined as data. And in this case, we just want to ignore the stream. So what we could do is that we filter our response. And if the art pieces are null or undefined, then we just ignore the stream, and otherwise we will continue. Or you can also go the fancy route with the Boolean, as Boolean is just a constructor. So it's a function that takes a value, returns a Boolean, so that's perfectly fine as well. So a second thing is that let's say some of these art pieces are copyright protected and we are not allowed to show them in our application. So what we need to do is that we map our stream. So we get all of the art pieces, that's the array. And then for each art piece, we call this filter function. So this is copyrighted function that is somewhere. And you already see that's not so straightforward. So in order to filter this in the array, I already have to call a map, which might not be the most intuitive thing. And this is just a bit of boilerplate because the only really important thing is that I call this method in here. And then after we have done this, we see that these items are rather big and we just want to work with a simplified model in our application. So what we want to do is that we again map over all of our art pieces. We get this array here and then map each element and simplify this art piece so that we have this model here. So, and that's our example implementation here. And it's a bit hard to look at. So it isn't really obvious what happens immediately. And my first tip that I show you today is that if you have things that you have in your RxJS streams and that are pretty repetitive, you might want to do custom operators for them. So for example, this filter Boolean, I mean, it looks nice, it's short and clear, but maybe for new developers who don't know that trick, it's maybe not obvious. So we could maybe exchange it with a custom operator, is truthy. And same for this map thingy here. So we could have a shortcut that when we know that we work with arrays, that we just say filter array, and now it's pretty clear what the code does. And we can have the same for the map array. So my first tip for you today is try to make your streams a bit more readable by maybe using custom operators. So the tip is not really just using the ones that I showed you now, but check your application. Maybe you can find common patterns of operators that you use, and maybe you can extract this logic into custom operators. Because creating a custom operator is really not that hard, because an operator is just a function that gets an observable as input and then again returns an observable. And if you have a function like this, then it can be included in this pipe thingy of RxJS. So let's have an example here with the isTrophy that we showed you earlier. So you get an input, that's an observable, and we have to return an output, that's again an observable. And inside of here, we can do the logic. And in this case, we just take the input and we call this filter. And that's basically it. So now you can use your custom operator inside of your pipe. The thing is, and maybe some of you already noticed, that this doesn't really look familiar, because normally you would call an operator with brackets. And the reason for this is that if you just do it like this here, it will work. But you have the problem that if you need some other parameters like a config object, then you don't have any place where you could put it, because you can't put it here as argument, because that is not really allowed in a pipe here. So RxJS is not really handling this then. So what you normally want to do is to wrap your operator function inside of another function. So creating a higher order function for this. And how that looks like is that you create this isTrophy before, like as before, but you see there is no argument now, because what we actually do is we take all of this function here and now put it inside of here. So we return a function that takes an input that is an observable, and then we do the same as before. And now it is called like you normally call an operator with the brackets. And if we would have some other arguments that we would need inside of our operator, then this could go here and the use case could add them here. Maybe one more thing to add is if, like in this case, we only need the filter operator, which is already implemented by RxJS. So what we can also do is have a simplified version where we just return this filter operator and we immediately call it with the right filter function that we need for our operator here. And then we save some of the other overhead with creating these inner functions. So as recap, the isTrophy, we just have seen that. How would that look like for the filter array, for example? So we would just return the map operator. That's the only one we need. We get the array, then we call array.filter. And for each item, we call the function that was given to us from the outside. And we can do the same for map array, but instead of this filter, we have a map and we have a mapper function here instead of a filter function. Okay, so let's say we have done this and we have fetched a list, and somewhere in our application we have the ng4, which renders the item. And that may look something like this. Okay, so far so good. Then let's continue to our next requirement. So now that we have this list of items, we want to make them selectable. So how could we achieve this? Right now in our component, we get two inputs. The first input is an art piece array, and the second input is a selection. And the selection is a set of number, where each number represents an ID from an art piece. And we have a template, as said before, some item, that is the visual part that we show, and we loop over it with ng4. And our art item can have a selected state that we can pass into it. And a first implementation approach would be to just say, okay, to determine if this item is selected or not, we call a function from our method. And we can do that here. So we create a function in our component, which gets the art piece and then checks our selection that we have here and checks if our ID of the current art piece is inside of it. And this will work. That's a valid implementation. But maybe some of you already know why this may not be really a good implementation. And I will show you. So if we add a console count here in this method, we can see what happens. It's because it normally works, so that's fine. But then when we open our DevTools in the browser, we see, oh, this console output is invoked a lot of times. And it's not only invoked on clicks, it's also invoked if I just hover over items. And so in this very short time frame, I produced now 4,000 invocations. And that's not really good. So what is the reason for this? And it's pretty simple. As you just call the function from the template, Angular needs to call that function on each change detection cycle. And so when you produce mouse over events, for example, Angular runs change detection, and with that, it runs your function. And so we want to avoid that. In the best case, we only want to call our function if either an art piece or the selection state has somehow changed. So only if I click items. And the Angular way of doing this is by using pipes. And we can create a pipe for this. And what you normally give it is a name. So in our case, it's the art selected pipe. And then we say our pipe should be pure. And what that means is that it will only recalculate its state if one of the inputs that it gets changes. So we'll see what that means concretely. So we implement the pipe transform interface and then implement the method. And what we get here is the value, the art piece, and additionally the selection. And so this pipe, as it's pure, will only compute the code that I will put in here if either the value or the selection changes. So in our use case, that would only be if the user clicks on an art piece. So what we do here again is the same as before. We check the selection, check if the ID is in there, and I also have a console count in here so that we can check afterwards if it really worked. But now we have a pipe, and when we have a pipe, we always need to declare it in an ng module. So we have to find an ng module that is fitting, add it there, export it from there, import that module into our feature module that we have now. So there's some stuff that we need to do. But after we have done this, then we can have this selected here, and instead of calling the isSelected function as before, we can have now here our art, use the pipe, which we just created, pass in the selection. And if we have done this, then you see that we don't have so many invocations anymore. So only if I click, then I have some invocations. But that's a lot better than before. So instead of 4,000 invocations, we have like 30 in this case. The thing is, yeah, that's the Angular way how to solve this. So now we don't have this performance issue anymore. But come on, it's one line of code. And what I need to do to make that performant is to create the pipe, register it in modules, and have this whole handling around it. Maybe there's a better way of how to do these simple things. And what you can do actually is that when we go back to our previous example, so we had this component with the method, and we called it directly. Wouldn't it be nice if we could change this here to something like this? So what happened now is that I changed it so that I have the art piece, and then there is a pipe, and this is a special pipe. This is now a rep fn. This stands for rep function pipe, and the rep function pipe takes any function that I give into it and some additional arguments. And so now, instead of having a separate pipe for just this use case, I can have a pipe that gets this function, calls this function, but it still has the advantages that it will not recompute every time. So to enable this, we have to do a small change in our component. So instead of accessing the this context here, we need to get rid of this, and we will pass the selection as a second argument and just use this argument instead of the this operator. Because we don't, in a pipe, you don't really have access to the this context, so we need to get rid of this. And let's see how that rep fn, so this generic pipe looks like. So again, we have a pipe with this name, and it's also pure. And the only thing it does is that it gets a value. It gets the wrapper function, that's the isSelected for our case here, and then some additional arguments. And whenever one of these three things changes, then we call the method. So we do the actual invocation. Then let's have a look at the use case again. So this is the art piece that will become our value. Our wrapper function in this case is the isSelected function that is implemented in the component. And then our additional arguments is, in this case, just the selection. And let's have a look again at the component class. So we reference the isSelected method, the art piece is passed in there, and then also our second argument. So tip number 2 that I have to you for today is you can have this generic wrapper function or wrapper pipe so that you can still call methods in your component. So you don't need a separate pipe for them, but they are still performant and will only be computed if something actually changes. So we have this now and everything works. Let's see what we're gonna do next. Okay, I just got a text from our designer, Yuqing, and she tells me the scroll bar look ugly, so please fix them. And I guess she has a point, because native scroll bars are not really the prettiest. So let's see what we can do about it. So our next requirement is we're gonna fix the scroll bars. And we have multiple options of doing that. So maybe a first approach would be to, okay, if they're ugly, why not just hide the scroll bars? And there are some CSS trickery like negative margins and things like this. But there is the problem that then the user don't has any scroll indication anymore. The user doesn't know if they can scroll down. And also not all users are used to the scroll wheel. Maybe some of them want to really click inside of the scroll bar. And so we don't really allow that for them anymore. So that's not an option. So what we could also do is that if you want to have a nicer scroll bar, we could use a third-party JavaScript library for that. For example, there is something called Perfect Scroll Bar, which looks just a bit nicer. The thing is, how they do it is that they completely hijack the native scrolling behavior. And so they need to change DOM elements. They have worse scroll performance because they need to hijack the scroll event and prevent it so that they can do their own logic in there. And also with that, you lose some of the native features, like you can do scroll snap or smooth scrolling anymore. So that's also not an option for us. But what we can do is to style the existing native browser scroll bar. So there are some pseudo elements that we can use. And as said, so this is native. We don't need any alteration of DOMs, and we don't need to mess with any JavaScript events. The only thing it's rather limited. So it's really a very limited scope of what you can do with your scroll bar. But let's have a look. So we have our scroll bar here, and what we can use is the WebKit scroller pseudo element. And there are some sub elements like the button, track, and thumb. So let's see what each of these things does. So the WebKit scroll bar is the whole of the scroll bar. The buttons are on the top and the bottom. The track is the thing inside of these buttons. And the thumb is the scroll indicator that you can also click and move around. And let's have a short example how we can just change it up a little bit to make it look a bit better. So the first thing we want to do is we want to have a different color for this track here. So I can say background color and move it to a dark gray. But as we see, we don't see any changes. And that's the first thing. It's a bit cumbersome sometimes to work with the scroll bar, because what we have to do to get any changes is that on the scroll bar, we need to set some properties. In this case, I set it to transparent so that we reset all of the initial styles and can do our own. And now we also see that we already have this background for the track. Then what we can do is, for example, have a smaller width on the scroll bar so it looks a bit nicer. And now let's reintroduce that thumb, because as we had this background color transparent, we also deleted our thumb. And how we can do that is that on the WebKit scroll bar thumb, we can have a background. And this can be either a simple color, or in our case, we want to have this fancy linear gradient from blue to pink. And you have to see what works and what not. So not all of the CSS properties will work. So for example, I can't put paddings in here or things like this. So if you want to try it out, just see what works and what not, do it live in the browser and you get the feeling. So in this case, for example, what you can also do is border radius, that works. So we can have that on the thumb, and we can also put it, for example, on the track. And now I think we have a pretty nice scroll bar, at least compared to the native one. How about browser support? So every time you see this WebKit prefix, you might think, okay, that's not really a standard thing, that's experimental. And you're somewhat right in here. So we don't care about Internet Explorer, but Firefox hasn't implemented this, unfortunately. The good thing is if you have these styles, then Firefox will not break or anything. So it will just show your normal native browser scroll bar. So you can have the nice scroll bar for the other browsers, and Firefox will remain at the native one. So it's not a big issue. And the second good thing is that also Firefox has some other API where you can do at least some changes as well. So what they support are the scroll bar width. So you can set it, for example, to thin. And the second property that they also support is the scroll bar color. And you pass two colors there. So the first one is the color of the thumb, and the second one is the color of the track. And so you can also give some better styling to your Firefox users, although it's very limited because these two are really the only properties that are supported by Firefox. So my tip number 3 for you today is fancify your scroll bars. You don't need a third party to do that. And please don't hide the scroll bars because this has some other issues. Okay, now we see we have our fancy scroll bar. What we're going to do next is that we have some responsive behavior that we want to introduce. So you see here at the right bottom, there is this resize toggle. It's a bit slow, but I hope you can see it. And with this, the user can change the width of our list here. And what we want to happen is that if the width gets too small, so that our title is not being able to be in one line, so it wraps to the second line, then we want to make place for it by removing this artist, because the artist is not so important for us. We want to have the line at the title here. So how that will look like is like this. You can resize that, and when it gets too small, then the artist disappears. When it gets big enough again, the artist is there. So the first instinct here would be, okay, can we do that with CSS? And it might be possible. In some other use cases, it's not possible. Let's say in this case, it is rather hard to do with just CSS, and we have to do some JavaScript in here. But how are we going to do that? And fortunately, there is a rather new API, which is called Resize Observer. And what this API does is that it takes some elements, so HTML elements that we fit, and when each time that one of these elements is resized, we get an entry from the Resize Observer. And on this entry, there are information like, okay, what is the new size? Where is the X and Y coordinates of these elements? So we can track it somehow. And I said, it's a bit of a newish API. How about browser support? That's fine. So again, we don't care about Internet Explorer, and all other major browsers have implemented it. So that's not an issue here. So working with this Resize Observer is always the same. So you always need to do the same steps. So that's perfect for Angular, because then we can move all of this logic into a directive that is then easily reusable wherever we need this kind of detection mechanism. So let's implement the directive. So our goal is here that we have an output that will emit each time that the element where this directive is on is resized. So that's our goal, to correctly emit into this output. And how we're going to do this is that we can declare a resize observer, and then we have the constructor. And in the constructor, we inject two different things. The first one is a reference to our element where this directive is on. And the second one is the ng zone. I will show you in a minute why we need the zone here. So what we can now do is that we instantiate a new resize observer by calling new. And then the constructor takes an argument that is a callback function. And this function is called every time that an element is resized. So what we can do here is that we iterate over these entries that we get from the resize observer. And for each entry, we say, please emit into our output. The thing why we need this zone here is because Zone.js has not patched the resize observer callback yet. So if we later use this output and do some changes in the UI, then Angular will not run change detection automatically. So we need to say this zone.run, because then we say to Angular, okay, this thing is important, and you need to run change detection after you execute code that comes after this. Okay, now we have declared our resize observer, but we have not started it yet. We have not given it an element yet. And how we do that is like this. So we call .observe, and say element.native element, so the thing that our directive is on. And from now on, this will work whenever this element here is resized. This code in here will run, and we will emit into our output. The only thing left to do for us is some teardown logic. So in ngOnDestroy, we want to call .disconnect on our resize observer just to make sure that nothing stays open. And then let's have a look at the usage. How can we actually work with this now? So I have the example here at the top. So there's a paragraph which shows the title, and then there's a sub element which shows the artist. And let's implement this behavior now that we saw earlier. So the first thing that we're going to do is having a flag that is telling me if the artist is visible or not, and have an ngIf there. So if the artist is visible, I want to show this element. And now comes the interesting part. So I add now this resize observer directive that we just created. And this gives me access to this resize output that we just implemented. And so I can call a function in here, show or hide artist. And this show or hide artist function gets this resize observer entry. So that's the thing that we did before. And in here, we can now have the logic. And in our case, for example, we know that if the height of our element here is lower than 20, then we know, okay, it's still in one line, and we show the artist. If it would be higher than 20, then we know, okay, the title wrapped into a second line, and we don't show the artist. And that's it. So with rather simple code here from the usage perspective, you can have this behavior that was previously, before we had resize observer, rather hard to do. And you can reuse that for all of your use cases. So it's always the same, adding the resize observer directive, checking the output, and then having some custom logic that's then dependent on your use case. So my tip number 4 for you is utilize the resize observer. Maybe you can use this directive as we did now to just have some more advanced and some better handling, maybe if the user resizes things on their page. And yeah, you can react a little bit better to that, give them a better UX. So that's done. Let's go to the next requirement, and that's more of a random requirement now. So what we want to do is we want to show a random dog image if the user scrolls to the end of the list. So to just fetch an API that gives us an image of a dog and then show this. So how could that look like? So let's say that if the user is here, they scroll to the very bottom and then they see a dog. So that seems pretty easy, right? Let's implement it. So we have this dog component that is responsible for fetching the dog image and showing it. And what we do here in the constructor, we have some service that we inject. And then in ngOnInit, we call this service, we get the dog image, and we set our image source to be this URL that we got from the backend service. And this will then render the image. And in the template, we have our list here, so the ng4. And then after the list, we will just show the app dog. And that's perfectly fine. So that's our implementation here. There's just one thing that's not really cool about this, and let's have a look at it. So on the right side, you see the network tab, so everything that's loaded. And when we refresh the page now, so immediately we see that we have this backend call, this random dog image, and we immediately also load the golden retriever image here. So the user hasn't scrolled down yet, but he already paid the price for the backend call and the image. And so what we want to do is that we only load these things actually if the user scrolls down to it. So that if the user doesn't scroll down, we don't load the image, which is faster for the initial loading of the page. And then if the user comes to the bottom and they need to see the dog, then we load it just on demand. Let's see how we can implement this. So like the resize observer, we have another cool API, which is called the intersection observer. And it works pretty much the same way. So we also give it an element, but now instead of listening to resizings of that element, the intersection observer will notify us every time that this element comes into the viewport or it goes out of the viewport. And each time we get an entry. And on this entry, there is one important property for us, which is called isIntersecting. So if isIntersecting is false, then we know, okay, this element is not in the viewport, so the user is not seeing this currently. If is intersecting is true, then we know, okay, the user sees this now, this just came into the viewport. And how can we utilize this? So wouldn't it be nice if you could have some usage like this, so that we have a wrapper element? In this case, it's just called dog container. And then inside of the wrapper element, we have the app dog. But now we added a special directive in here, which is called in viewport. And how you can read this is that if the dog container comes into the viewport, then we want to render the app dog. So, and I will show you now how you can implement such a directive. So let's start with it. So it's a structural directive. So we have a star in front of the directive, which means that when we have an input that is called the same as the directive, then we will get as a value the thing that was passed in here. So in our case, this in viewport input will be the dog container. Then we declare an observer, in this case, the intersection observer, and we have a constructor. And now we inject two things. The first is the template ref. So the first is a reference to this app dog thingy here. And the second one is the view container. So that's the space that we got from Angular to render stuff in here. And we will say later how that works together. So after view init, in this case, I just wanted to let the view settle a bit. And then we create our intersection observer. And that's the resize observer. So just calling new and then having this callback function. In this case, we are not interested in all of the entries. We just want to have the last one. So we get here the last of the entries. And then we say, okay, if the entry is intersecting, so if this just came into the viewport, then I do this line of code. So I take my view container, so the space that Angular gave me, and I create an embedded view with this template ref. So what that means is now I render the app dog component. That's what this line does. And after that, I don't need to listen to any events anymore. I rendered my thing. I don't want to do anything else. So I disconnect from the observer. And again, we just have initialized this observer. We also need to give it an element. And in this case, we want to listen to this in viewport thing, so to our dog container. And so now when the dog container comes into the viewport, this callback will be executed and we will create this app dog component inside of this view container. And again, there's a bit of teardown to do, and that's it. And now let's have a look what we changed. So because now, if we refresh the page, you will see nothing. So nothing was loaded yet. And then when we scroll down, you see just in time, we had the backend call, and then we showed the image. So tip number 5 is to utilize the intersection observer. Make sure to load content only if you really need it. And this can be images, but this could also be other things like maybe a chart of a stock, or so you want to show the S&P 500, but only if the user scrolls to it, because you don't want to load the whole charting library or make the backend call to this API prematurely. You just want to do it if the user really needs it. And so you can maybe also use this in viewport directive to just show content if you need it. Don't do it before. So we are nearly at the end. So the last thing that we want to do is to add some copyright information. So we have this cool app now. We want to go public with it, but of course there's some legal stuff to do. And how that looks like for our application is that on the right top, we have an icon. And if we click on that icon, then there's just some legal text visible to us. Let's see how this is implemented. So we have this icon here, and we have a click listener on the icon, and this is calling a method. And then inside of our component, we have an import for our copyright component. So that's the thing that is popping up inside of the dialog. We inject mat dialog into our constructor. And then somewhere we call this mat dialog.open and show our copyright component. So that's pretty easy. But there is actually one thing that happened in the background, which is rather not that good. And what happened is that before we had a main.js bundle from which is 42 kilobytes, and this is now 104 kilobytes. So the user now pays the price for the whole copyright component immediately on page load. And we want to avoid that. And let's see how we can delay that somehow. So we need to do a bit of a preparation here, because how it currently looks like is that we have the copyright component. And then in our app module, we declare this component. The thing is, in order to declare the component here, we need to import our copyright component into our app module. And whenever you import something into app module, that will end up in the main.js bundle somehow. So the first change that we need to do is to still have the component, but now instead of declaring it in the app module, what we're going to do is to declare it in the same file. So we create a module just for this component. And what we now have achieved is that we don't need an import in app module anymore. So it's now self-contained. So it's only this one file and all of the information is in there. And you might know this term already. So this is a single component Angular module. And the more popular name for it, it's a scam. So whenever you read scam, you know, okay, that's just a component which has its ng module in the same file. So how does it help us? We still have the issue that when we open the dialog, we still have the import there in our app component. So that's still gonna cause the whole thing to come into the main bundle. And if you just remove the import, then of course you get a syntax error because it doesn't know the copyright component anymore. And we have one feature there that we can use that comes actually from Webpack, which is called dynamic imports. So instead of having this normal import, we can have this dynamic import. So we just call import, give it a path, and then Webpack returns a promise to us, which has this thing inside of it. So all of the contents of the file that we gave it. So in our case, that's our scam component. And then in here, we can say mat.dialog.open, but instead of just using the copyright component that would have been needed to be imported, we can access this thing that we got from Webpack. And so now we don't have an import anymore. And Webpack is smart enough so that we don't end up with one big main.js bundle anymore, but this is now separated into two. So we have the main.js bundle back at 40 kilobytes, and Webpack now created this lazy chunk. So this is now everything that is related to this copyright component. And how that looks like in action is that on the right side, you see the JavaScript files that we load. And on the initial load, we only have this main.js bundle with 40 kilobytes. And then when we click on the icon, then this lazy chunk is loaded. So it's just loaded in time. So for example, if a user will never click on this icon, they will never need to load the 60 kilobytes and we will save them from them. And that's perfectly fine. That looks really good. But there's one slight issue. And the thing is, if I click on this icon, then the browser might need to have some time to load the module, because I don't know, maybe your user has a small internet, a slow internet connection, or your bundle is really big that you need to load. And so it might happen that there is a small delay between clicking the button and actually seeing what happens. And I mean, that's maybe not of an issue for your use case. You have to check this, but there's also a small optimization that we can do here. And it has to do with how humans click on buttons. So there is this test, which you can also try at instantclick.io, where you can click a button and it will show you the time from the hover event to the click event. Because as a human, you need some time after you hovered over the button to actually click the button. And I have done that here just for demonstration purposes. And you see that with very fast clicks that I have with my rather good mouse, I still need 150 to 300 milliseconds. And so we can utilize that. So what we could do is that we check the hover event. So we register an event on mouse enter, and we already use this to preload the module. So preloading just looks like this. So we import from Webpack. And as this is a promise, it's eagerly evaluated, so it immediately runs. We don't need to call then or something on this. And then on the click event, we call this function again. We get our module and we open the dialog as we did before. And we also don't care about loading this module twice, because the browser is smart enough to not actually load it twice, but only do it once. And so now we have a better chance that if the user actually clicks, that the module is maybe already loaded in the background because it had some time, some 100 to 300 milliseconds time. Let's see that in action again. So nothing happened yet. And now when we hover, you see the module is loaded. And then when the user clicks, then the module is already there and there is no waiting time anymore between the click and then the action that happens after the click. So my tip number 6 for you is be lazy when loading your components. So most of you already know lazy loading of routes, but you can also do it for components. And especially for dialogues, it's rather easy to do, but you can also achieve this with sidebars, for example. So if your sidebar is not opened, then it doesn't make sense that the user needs to actually load bundles that are just visible inside of the sidebar. So you might save some initial load there for the user, make your site faster. So that's it. I want to have a short recap of what we learned today. So the first thing is, if you find patterns in your application where you need to do complex or rather annoying RxJS thingies, try making custom operators out of them to abstract away the complexity. The second thing would be that you can have this generic function wrapper pipe so that you don't always need to create the separate pipe for each use case, but you can have one pipe and then call functions in your component. The third tip was to use scrollbar styles. So use the WebKit scrollbar pseudo element to just have a bit of a nicer scrollbar without needing to have a third-party dependency or without needing to have hide the scrollbar altogether. The fourth thing was that we can utilize the resize observer to get more advanced handling when we just want to detect resizes of single elements. And the fifth tip was to use the intersection observer so that we can just lazily load content into view when it's needed for the user. So when it comes into the viewport and not before. And the last tip was to not only lazy load your routes, but also do it with individual components to have a very small initial bundle size. And with that, I am at the end of my presentation for you today.
Hello, welcome back to the studio. From one Benedikt to another, I have to say, really interesting presentation, and I especially liked your color highlighting in the code snippets.
Thank you.
So we have a little bit time left, so let's jump right into some questions, I would say. Martin Stefanovic wants to know whether we need to create a module for each Angular component.
Yeah, so normally you would need to if you want to have any features inside of that component. So let's say you use the ngIf directive or things like this. So Angular needs to have some context about that component, and that only happens when you have a module. But as you have seen, you don't need to extract it into some other module that's already loaded, but it is enough if you have just a module that is loaded on demand. So as you have seen, we never really actually did something with that module from the scam component. It was just inside of the file that we then gave to Webpack to load for us. And that's already enough for Angular to pick up the module and then doing all of the stuff behind so that dependency injection works, that you can use pipes from other modules and things like this.
Okay, thanks for this insight. Another question might be from Christine. Benedikt, what would you say was the most useful update in version 13, and what do you expect from upcoming releases?
Okay, that's a very broad question, but
Maybe
I can try.
three things.
Yeah. So let's say my favorite feature that will come in the future is we saw the scam components, and actually Angular wants to build that somehow more into the framework with this standalone components, pipes, and directives, so that maybe in the future we exactly have that, as you said before, that we don't need a module anymore for components, directives, and pipes, but we can just have them as a standalone. And that's something that I guess will come with 14 or 15, I'm not sure. But that's the thing that I'm most excited about at the moment. And also getting better types for Angular forms. I think that's something that we're waiting for years, and that will finally happen in the near future.
I hope so too. So maybe another question from Kira. When you started developing in Angular, why did you choose Angular and not other frameworks or libraries? Can you explain yourself?
So for me, it was pretty easy. So when I started at the company, we used Angular JS already, and we immediately did the switch to Angular. So there wasn't really React or Vue or any of these frameworks at that time. But now, of course, you have a lot of different options to choose from. Most popular, I guess, are still React and Angular. And I mean, you can get a job with any framework, and some framework is better at things than other frameworks are. What I like about Angular is that you have this whole ecosystem. You don't need, so you always have a thing or a path which is recommended by Angular. So we have all of this module, like we know we use Angular forms for form thingies. We know we can use Angular animations. We know that we can use the Angular material library. And for other things like React, you maybe have 3 or 4 options at each of these things. And so sometimes it's harder to have these kind of options, because then you don't know what is the best way to do things. And in the Angular ecosystem, it's pretty much like there is one thing that is supported by the community, and it's normally a good thing to do, so you don't run into any issues with compatibility or things like this.
Okay, thank you. Another question from Gaurav Gorg, I hope I didn't butcher that name too much, would be how to use intersection observer inside the for loop.
Inside the for loop. Okay, so we have seen the intersection observer. We created a pipe out of it, so this in viewport pipe. And for example, if you want to lazy load the images from the arts that we showed, you can just have the intersection observer on these images. So you also can put it on items that are in an ng for loop. That's not really different to anything that we did today in this presentation. I mean, one thing that we can maybe add here is that if you have a lot of items, and so you would create a lot of resize observers, and there are some optimizations you can do to only have one resize observer and give all of the elements of the list into this one resize observer. So that's maybe one thing that you want to consider for production apps. But I guess if the element is in a loop or not is not really relevant for this.
Okay. Maybe this question from Lisa regarding your work. What kind of projects are you working on in your company?
Okay, so we are creating products. So we have our own product that we then sell to our customers, and it's a digital asset management system. And what that means is that a company can pull all of the files and all of the images, all of the videos into our system. We can do the metadata handling there, make it searchable, and then stream it out to their things, like they maybe have a CMS or they maybe have a YouTube channel and things like this. So our system stands in the middle of all of this to create the content, upload it there, modify it there with some workflows, and then stream it out to, as said, for example, a YouTube channel. And our customers are mostly marketing departments of big companies, like I've shown you maybe Bayern Munich or Voestalpine for Linz people. So we do that for rather big companies.
Sounds very interesting, Benedikt. Maybe to round it up, do you have any further resources for us you want to share, like blogs, books, YouTubers maybe?
So I will share my presentation in the stream afterwards, and I can also put some more reading material there as well to read up on things like intersection observer, resize observer, or some blogs that I'm mostly into, like the dev.to blog and stuff like this.
Okay. Benedikt, thank you so much for the talk. It was really nice to have you, and many greetings to Wales, and I hope to see you soon.
Thanks for having me.
Bye. So We are now going into a short break of about 7 minutes, but stay tuned as we have 2 more very interesting speakers today. See you in.
Have you found your dream job as a developer? Or are you stuck in an unfulfilling job? On WeAreDevelopers.com, you find over 1,000 jobs in Europe that fit the tech stack that you want to work with, and salaries go up to $130K. All you have to do is create a free profile, and you automatically get matched with jobs that fit your requirements. So what are you waiting for? Create your free profile and let companies apply to you now.
Welcome back at the WeAreDevelopers Live Angular Day. I hope you liked our first talk of the day, so let's get ready to our second. The second speaker is Patricio Vargas. He's a senior developer advocate at OneSignal. And as far as I know, he's a very helpful person, so he's very active in some communities. Please welcome with me, Patricio.
Hey everyone, how are you? Doing good?
How are you doing?
Doing great. Early in the morning, I'm super excited. I think this is the right way to start the day, helping the community. So hopefully everything goes good.
I heard you butchered your sleep rhythm for us.
Yeah.
But
I had to put like
right.
20 alarms to make sure that I was waking up.
Okay, we appreciate this. We really do. So, little bird shot me, you are a little bit in love with Vienna, is that right?
Say what again?
I heard you're really in love with Vienna. Is that right?
With Vienna?
Vienna.
Oh, with Vienna. I thought you said Vienna. I
Sorry
said
for
maybe
my
I'm in love with
pronunciation.
Vienna. Maybe I'm in love with Vienna too. Yes, I love Vienna. It took my heart. When I was there in 2015, I was impressed how kind the people were, the lifestyle, how everything was walking distance, and how clean and helpful were the people. Like everyone was like super helpful to me. I got lost multiple times because in 2015, the cell phone that I got didn't have international internet connection. So I was getting everywhere using a map, like a paper map. And I asked help all the time and people were so helpful. And I was like, oh my God, I wish I could live there one day. Yeah.
Always worth a travel. So let's jump right back to Angular. Would you like to share with us what we are going to learn from you today?
Yeah, for sure. So there's this awesome technology called Tailwind CSS, and I'm going to show you how to level up your CSS and make sure that you understand what Tailwind is about, how to integrate it into your Angular application, and how to start playing with Tailwind CSS.
Patricio, you got my full attention, and I would say the stage is yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, I guess, if you're in Europe. Today, I'm going to be talking about how to level up your CSS with Tailwind CSS. Thank you so much, OneSignal, to my employer who gave me the opportunity and the time to prepare this talk. So thank you so much. I appreciate you guys. So who am I? I'm Patricio Vargas. I go by Pato. Pato means duck, quack, quack. That's my nickname. Feel free to call me that way. If you want to call me Patricio, that's 100% fine. I have been called Pato since I was a little baby, so it's really up to you. I tend to say that my enemies call me Patricio and my friends call me Pato, but honestly, it's just a joke. Feel free to call me however you want. I'm a senior developer advocate at OneSignal. I'm also a Google developer expert on web technologies. I'm a Auth0 ambassador, Postman Supernova. I'm a Twilio champion. I'm an AWS community builder, Google Woman Tech Maker, and a media developer expert at Cloudinari. So feel free to follow me on Twitter, on DevPato, and if you have any questions, feel free to tweet me. So let's start with the basics, right? I don't know what is your background, so I'm going to start with the clearly basics. What is CSS? Well, CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. CSS describes essentially how your HTML is going to look like, right? The HTML is the bones and the structure of your HTML. Of your website. The CSS for me is the clothing, how your application is going to look like. And JavaScript is for me the muscles, right? You're giving the power and the functionality of a website using JavaScript. So essentially, CSS allows you to write like custom properties, that help you make beautiful sites, right? Or very ugly if you're me, because I'm like terrible at designing websites. But if you tell me, hey, I need you to create exactly that website, this is how it's supposed to look like, I'll make sure that it looks pixel perfect. But if you tell me to come up with my own design, it's just not gonna happen. So how to level up your CSS, right? Sometimes CSS can be a little bit complicated. Sometimes CSS can be very time consuming, and that is a reason why Tailwind came up, right? Tailwind is a tool that that is a utilities first framework that allows you to build websites in a faster way, in a more structured way as well, using CSS. Some people tend to say, hey, Tailwind is gonna make you a better UI designer. I don't agree so, because you can still be using Tailwind CSS and still make your website look ugly, which I'm pretty sure that's gonna be the case in this talk. I don't think the website that we're gonna be building is gonna look like beautiful, but I'm gonna show you how to integrate and how to mix and how to level up the power of your CSS using Tailwind. So essentially, what Tailwind does is, like I was telling you, is a CSS framework packed with classes already predefined for you. So instead of you going to your CSS and having to write all these classes that you're coming up with, Tailwind already made them for you, and all you have to do is use them and apply them in your HTML. For example, they have one called Flex, one that is PT4, and PT stands for padding, and the T stands for top, so padding top 4 pixels, and then text center is going to align your text to the center, and so on. So what are some of the advantages of Tailwind CSS? Well, Tailwind CSS has multiple advantages in my personal point of view. It gives you more time to write your business logic, and your business logic is going to be written in JavaScript, Angular, React, or whatever technology you want. It has some classes already made for you. Like I was telling you, all you have to do is combine them. For example, if we look at the screenshot on the right, as you can see, I have all these classes that says MT-4, which MT actually stands for margin top 4 pixels, right? And then MD means medium device. So you are already integrating in this tag right here. You're integrating media queries, right? Without you having to write all these complex media queries. And let me tell you a secret about me. I have been writing CSS for, I don't know, maybe 10, 12 years, who knows? And I have never memorized the syntax of writing a CSS media query. That's just a secret. This is gonna be between us. Hopefully, my employer doesn't know about this, but that's the actual truth. And so what I do, I literally just copy paste from Google all the time, and then I just tweak the values depending on my needs. But the cool thing with Tailwind CSS is that all you have to do is just add a media query and just using a predefined class that they already wrote for us. So it's very easy to memorize, and it's very easy to work with responsiveness, because Tailwind CSS is mobile first. So instead of having the desktop view and then trying to convert it into mobile, it's always like mobile. And then if you need to adapt it into desktop view, you adapt it using the predefined classes that they have. Another cool thing is it's very light in production, meaning Tailwind CSS, whenever you're working in development mode, it's gonna integrate thousands of predefined classes that they have made for you. And all these classes have a weight, meaning your bundle size might be a few megabytes, but because it has the ability to purge the CSS classes that you're not using in your CSS, is gonna get rid of them. Then the bundle size is gonna be smaller. It's because you're only bundling the things that you need in your application. It's very extensible, and it's very easy to customize. And you can use the old school way, which is the way of adding all these classes in your HTML. And there's a new way of doing it as well to make your HTML cleaner, because as you can see, if you see this picture on the right, you can see that I'm adding 1, 2, 3, 4 classes, and you can add 20, 100, and so on. And that maybe is gonna make your HTML look a little bit dirty, and you want to avoid that, right? So I'm gonna show you a trick on how to do that as well. And it has a VS Code extension, which is awesome. As you can see on the right side, if you see this autocomplete that it says BG, which stands for background, and then I'm typing the color red, right, is giving me this autocomplete, and I can see the actual color that I'm going to be selecting. So very cool to have a VS Code extension for your Tailwind CSS. So now a demo. I'm going to be doing a live demo. Just let's pray that nothing happens. You know, sometimes demos tend to fail. So let's see how it goes. So I have this Angular application right here. I'm going to go to terminal. And then I can see that I have my application. Hold on, I'm going to stop it. And I'm going to rerun it. ngServe. Sure, let's use a different port. Okay, I'm going to copy this link. Then I'm going to go over here. And this is my beautiful website. I have this logo, which is the Angular logo. And then I have a text right here that says we are developers. And I have a button that says hello. So why don't we start tweaking this page to make it look better and using Tailwind CSS? So I want to show you guys how to do this using the documentation from Tailwind, right? I want you guys to get familiar in this talk. How am I going to be playing with the documentation? How am I going through the documentation and how I'm integrating all the CSS classes that Tailwind is providing to us into my Angular application? So why don't we go ahead and get started by going into the docs. So all you have to do is go to tailwindcss.com. And this is what you're going to see. They have like some like live demo going on. Well, it's not live, but like recorded. It's actually kind of cool. So these are some of the people that have tried Tailwind CSS. I actually know a few of them. Shout out to Debbie for writing a comment. She's amazing. And Kenneth and Ryan, super cool people. But I'm going to go ahead and click on get started. And I'm going to show you the steps on how to integrate Tailwind CSS. Everything should be easy. So why I don't click on this? This is copy, and basically what I'm doing is installing the npm package from Tailwind CSS, and then I'm gonna run this npx Tailwind CSS init, which is going to generate the tailwind.config.js file for me. So let's go back to my Angular application, and I'm just gonna do this. I'm gonna have I'm gonna create a new terminal. Okay. And yes, I want to paste it. And then as you can see, I'm running the npm install Tailwind CSS and then the npx Tailwind CSS init. Okay, the second command didn't run, so I think that was, oh, okay, I'm curious, it's because I have to click enter again. So the second command is the npx Tailwind CSS. The first command was the one installing the npm package. As you can see, it already installed it. So now I'm just gonna click enter, and this should be generating a file for me. And here it is. As you can see, Tailwind CSS init. Right here, it created this tailwind.config file. So this is how your configuration file should look like. Now, we need to specify Tailwind, what kind of content I'm going to be working with, right? And there's this code that I'm going to copy. And I'm just going to paste it over here. And basically what it's saying, hey, if you have files that have the HTML or TS or whatever, work with them. Tailwind should be familiar with these kind of files. So I'm gonna save it, right? And let's actually test if Tailwind is working. So I'm gonna clear my screen. And before you actually start integrating the CSS classes, you need to import Tailwind into your SAS file or CSS file. In this case, I'm using SAS, so I'm gonna import all the CSS properties that Tailwind has predefined for me. So as you can see, I put Tailwind CSS base, the components and the utility ones, and this is important. The CSS classes that Tailwind made for me that come with the npm package. So I'm gonna save this, and then I'm gonna go to my HTML. And as you saw before, I have a button. I have this this paragraph that says WeAreDevelopers, and I just have the Angular logo. So just a quick way to test the application to see if it's working with Tailwind. Maybe we want to give it the color red to this button. So we do BG, and then we do, let's say, red, and then why don't we give it a color of 400? Cool. We're gonna save it, and then just pray for the best that it's actually working. So it's not working. So let's see what's happening. Actually, I'm gonna start my server again. Serve. Let's just pray for the best. Okay, let's copy this. It's a new server. Okay, there you go. So what I needed to do is restart my server. So keep that in mind. And I'm glad that I'm showing you this. So if it happens to you, you don't freak out. So I'm using this background color. I know my button looks ugly. I'm aware. You don't have to tell me. So why don't we make this application a little bit cuter using Tailwind CSS? I already confirmed that my Tailwind is working because I'm using the VG-red-400 class that Tailwind made for me. And check this trick. If I click on inspect the page, and I look at the button, you see that it says VG-red-400, right? You can see the values that Tailwind created for me. I'm zooming in. So it says background color, and then they have this RGB that they created using a Tailwind variable, and the opacity. It's pretty cool, right? So I'm just gonna put it like this so we can see how everything is looking like in the mobile view, because remember, Tailwind's mobile first. So now let's do this. I think the first thing that I want to do is I want to center everything in the center of the page vertically and horizontally. So with that being said, I need to give the page a height, right? Because the width by default is 100%. So this is the documentation. When you click on docs, so let's see, did I click on it? Yeah. It's not taking me to the docs. I don't know why. Okay, let's click on this. Oh, okay. Oh, I was already in the docs. I'm sorry. My bad. Now I'm gonna click on the quick search. And the cool thing I like about Tailwind CSS is that it finds you the stuff on how you think in English, right? Meaning, if you're looking for height, I'm just gonna do, let's say, height, and then you're gonna click on this part right here on this reference, and you can see the classes that they have already made for you, which is H1, H0, H2, and so on. And it gives you the actual property value that they're giving to that class that they predefined for you. So if I scroll all the way down, I want to use H-screen to give it a height to my page of 100 virtual height. So I'm literally just gonna go back to my Tailwind CSS, and I'm just gonna give this div that height. So it's gonna be H.screen, right? So now my page has a height of 100 VH. And well, not my page, but my div. What else we want to do? So we want to center everything, and I can do that using Flexbox. So now I'm gonna go back to the search and type flex, and there you go. First thing on the top, I'm gonna click flex, and we can see this instruction. It says that the first thing that I need to do is actually integrate this class property that they already made for me called flex. So we're gonna do that. I'm gonna do flex, which is in the parent component, because I want to flex everything that is inside that component. And now, as you can see, you might be wondering, okay, Pato, where's your text that says WeAreDevelopers and where's the button? Well, they're going to be all the way over here. Why? Because I did flex, right? And remember, flex by default works horizontally. Now, what I want to do is apply a property that does this for me, and that switch the direction of my flex, which in this case is going to be column. So one more time, I go to maybe they have it here, somewhere here, flex auto, none, hover focus. Let's keep scrolling down. And they don't have it here in this section. Grow, oh, flex direction over here. So as you can see, I can use row, which specifies the direction as a row, which is the default one from flex. And I want to do flex dash col, which is going to be the direction of column. So it's going to flip things from horizontal to vertical alignment. So let's type this right here. Flex. Flex, what was it? Flex direction is going to be flex col. Okay, flex col. Save it. Then I go back and boom. You see? Let's see what else we want to do. Let's see. Let's try to text. Let's try to center our text. Text alignment. Text left. Text center. Let's see if this works. Actually, I can do this using. Let's see. There's two ways of me centering the text: using text center or using flexbox. So because I want to center everything to the center of the page, I'm just gonna do flexbox again. So flex, and it's gonna be, I don't know. So it's gonna be align, vertical alignment, align. Let's see, they have center. This is what I need. This controls the vertical alignment of an inline or table cell box. Okay, so align. Let's look for this. Let's justify self, justify items, justify content. Let's see, justify content. It's gonna be center, right? So by justifying things, center is gonna be centering everything in the middle of the page. So I definitely need this one as well. And then we look for the one for alignment as well too. Like I said, this is live coding, and this is for you, all to help me out if something breaks. Okay, so now I put everything in the middle of the page vertically because I'm using the justify content, and this might be something tricky for you. You might be thinking, well, you use justify content, but justify content is to center things horizontally. Yes, 100%, but because we switch the direction of my flex elements to vertically, now the justify content is aligning things vertically instead of horizontally. So now I need to use align items to center things horizontally, right? So now we go back here again and we look for that property one more time. Align items. Okay, so it's okay. So okay, align items, utilities for controlling how flex and grid items are positioned along the containers across axes. So this is exactly the one that I need because I'm using Flexbox. So I'm gonna do items center, and I'm gonna do this right here, and there you go. Everything is centered. So now what I want to do, I make my button look a little bit prettier, and I'm gonna do maybe padding. Let's do a padding of 4. Oops, I'm sorry. Okay, so I'm giving some padding, and maybe I want to give it some width as well. So let's go to width, and my width is gonna be, I don't know, should we do like what, like 4, or do like a bit more? Actually, no, let's do width. Let's do width 3, 6. This is gonna be W3 6, which is gonna be 50%, and boom, it's looking better, you know. So I think hopefully you're getting your idea of how this is working, and you're literally everything that you think about CSS, making the buttons curve. You can do that as well, right? You can give it some border, and you can give it shadow, and you can change the font size. And why don't we change the font size of WeAreDevelopers? Let's make it a little bit bigger. Font size. And then I'm gonna do, let's do text LG. Let's see right here, text LG. Oh no, you see? That's the problem with live coding. I put LEG, and so it's just LG. I don't know if that actually made it bigger. I don't think it did. Maybe that's just the default. The default text by default is just large. So why don't we change it to something else? Let's change it to this. Let's say text 6XL. There you go. So it's actually working, right? So now let's do text center. Boom. There you go. Now what I want to do is, as you can see, it looks kind of ugly because the WeAreDevelopers is touching the button underneath, and I actually hate this color of this button, so I'm just gonna change it to something cooler. So I'm just gonna do like, maybe they have like, let's see what other colors they got. I mean, they have everything. So actually, I'm gonna do it using the documentation. Oops, I was saving that. Color, background color, Okay, VG transparent. So as you can see, I have all these beautiful colors right here, and I want to do that like this VG green 800, just to change it a little bit, making sure my application looks cooler. There you go. Actually, I hate it. I'm sorry. I'm gonna do the 601. It's just too dark for me. Cool. I think that looks better. Okay, so now that you're hopefully paying attention to this talk, if I want to give some margin to my button so it separates the WeAreDevelopers from the button itself, what CSS property I'm gonna be using from Tailwind. So I'm just gonna give you a few seconds, and you tell me what's up. I'm zooming in. I'm just gonna give you like 10 seconds. And so if I want to give some margin, what CSS property I'm gonna be using from Tailwind CSS. Okay, so hopefully you all got it. So it's gonna be the margin, right? So go to margin, and the way you do the margin is by applying the M, which stands for margin, right? As you can see, I can use MX, which is margin left, and margin right, which is the x-axis, right? So you see how the CSS properties are literally made how your English is in your brain. I don't know if I'm explaining myself, but it's very easy and to memorize or to come up with these classes whenever you're going CSS, just because they make sense. So for example, if I want to apply only margin to the top, right? As you can see, it's MT margin, and then T for the top. Right, so I want to apply margin just to the top in this case. So I'm gonna do MT, and then I'm just gonna give it the value of like 4. So I'm gonna go to my button, and I'm gonna do MT4. Then we're gonna save this, and then we're gonna go back to our application, and here's more space. Let's do one more thing. Let's just make this Angular logo a little bit smaller. And we do that one more time by using height. So the height, I'm just going to give it, I don't know. Let's just like H. No, H4 is probably too small. Let's do some H8. So I have this Angular logo, and then I'm going to do class. And we set H8, right? So height 8. We save it. And of course, it's too small. Oh my God. Let's do 2/5, which is 40%. And let's see how it looks like. That looks better. It's a little bit too big still for my opinion, but that actually looks way better. So what else? What else are we doing? Oh, yes. Why don't we give our application a little bit of animation? So once again, that's another thing that I have never been able to memorize animation syntax inside of CSS. Thank Lord. With Tailwind CSS is super easy. So I'm going to go over here, Tailwind CSS, and I'm going to type animation. And here I have some predefined animations for me. So animate spin, ping, pulse, bounce. Why don't we get some spinning to the logo? Let's see how the logo looks like by spinning it. And boom, there you go, right? Hopefully it doesn't get you dizzy. And then I want to give some bouncing to the button. So my button is gonna have this bouncing. Boing, boing, boing. Cool, very cool. Actually, this is like driving me crazy already. So I'm just gonna use animation pulse. I'm just gonna change it a little bit. But you see how awesome it is that they even provide you the properties. I think this is really cool. It makes you really see what Tailwind is doing behind the scenes. So instead of spin is going to be pulse. Save it, and you can see how it's fading in and out. Very cool. But also something that I want to do is my application is working with the responsiveness of the website, right? As you can see, I'm making it bigger, smaller, and it's adapting. And everything looks the same. But what about if I want to have a different animation on a larger device? So we're going to go to Tailwind, and then we're going to do media queries, maybe. Media queries. I mean, looks like here's an example. Media queries. So MD, breakpoints. Okay, let's scroll all the way up. Core concepts, responsive design. Maybe that's actually better. Yeah, this is exactly what I need. Responsive design. Using responsive utility variants to build adaptive user interfaces. Breakpoint prefixes SM for small device and MD for medium device. So in this case, all you have to do is, hey, do MD for a medium device and give it the CSS property that you want. So why don't we do that? So in my logo, I'm going to do MD calling animate dash spin. So in my bigger screens, I'm going to have this animation. And in my devices, mobile devices, I'm going to have a different animation. The default animation is going to be this one, animate pulse. And for medium-sized devices, it's going to be animate spin. So as you can see, I have the pulsing, and let's see what happens when I change the size of my device. Boom, pa 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 pa. You see how easy? Oh my God, this is so cool. I keep like getting my mind blown every time I do media queries with Tailwind just because it's so easy. So see, boom, no cheating. Like everything live coding. The way you see it is the way I sell it. I'm kidding, but but yeah. What else? What else I want to show you? Oh, yeah, something super important. As you can see, my button, for example, it started to get ugly. And what I mean with ugly, a lot of CSS classes in my HTML, which is going to make my HTML look ugly once again, and it's going to make it hard to read. So why don't we clean this up? Is there a way to do it? Of course. So what you have to do is I'm going to copy all these classes that I've been using. Then I'm going to remove them, and I'm going to give this button a class of VTN. Save it. And then I'm going to go to my app component.css file. And then I'm going to do .btn, open my curly brackets. And then I'm going to use this reserved keyword called apply. Then I'm going to paste my CSS classes that I've been using. Save and pray that it works. Oh, there you go. It's working. As you can see, I have the button class over here, so you know that it's actually using the latest changes, and I can see what are the animations and the padding that I gave to my button class. You see? Super cool. Well, I think it's cool. What else is for me to show you? Back in the days, you had to specify Tailwind CSS that you were doing some purging, right? Because back in the days, your application was extremely heavy if you didn't do the purging. So now that that this is like handled by default for you, you don't have to worry about doing the purging. And I'm gonna share with you a article or a how-to guide that I wrote. So you can find it on Dev2. My username is DevPato. So I'm this guy right here. This is my username, and you can find all my blog posts that I have written in there. And one of those blog posts is the one for Angular Tailwind. So set up Tailwind CSS in Angular the easy way. Click in there, and it's actually pretty popular. It has like thousands of views, and I explain you what CSS is about, the content, and of course, if you want to skip the, you know what this means, you can jump straight to the installation steps. And I teach you how to do it in the new Angular versions and in the old Angular versions, and how to integrate your Tailwind CSS. Because before section 11.2, you had to use an external npm package that some community members wrote in order for you to get Tailwind working with Angular. After version 11.2, you're able to use Tailwind the same way that you use it with React, Vue, just regular CSS and JavaScript applications, or whatever framework you prefer. So what the installation process is not going to work. Maybe this talk was for Angular developers, but if you follow along, it's literally the same steps. Nothing changed. You just change the name of the framework that you're using. That's something cool about Tailwind CSS, that you don't have to worry about different dependencies or different setup depending on the technology that you're using. If you're familiar with React and Tailwind, you're familiar with Angular and Tailwind already. So like I was telling you about the purging, right? If I keep scrolling down, in this document, you see I show you how to do the button and how to use the apply and all that. But if you keep scrolling down, I talk about the purging, right? Back in the days, you had to specify this, that if you were building in production, you will need to get rid of the unused CSS classes. And as you can see, back in the days, the purging used to be, without doing the purging, my size of a really tiny application will be 4.9 megabytes, which is extremely heavy. And you can see the size of just my CSS itself is 4.78 megabytes. After doing the purging, it came down to be 4.11 kilobytes, and the total of my application 223 kilobytes. So super cool. Now I don't have to worry about adding this extra step and setting up my purging, because Angular is doing that for me. It's getting rid of the unused CSS classes. So now I think that was that was enough information about Tailwind CSS. Hopefully you learned how easy it is to integrate it and how easy it is to use. From animations, media queries, that's what we cover. We cover Flexbox, color, padding, text, everything that you can do with pure CSS, you can do it with Tailwind. So keep that in mind. And this is something that I like I was telling you before, like Tailwind CSS doesn't tell you, hey, these are the design patterns that you should follow. Meaning like it's just Tailwind is not gonna make your applications pretty, right? CSS is just gonna make you build the applications in a faster way using CSS. I have found very valuable Tailwind CSS for creating design systems. Why? Because you can customize it however you want. Sure, as you can see, if I go to customize, let's see, customize. Let's see if we find it in the docs right here. We're using customize. Okay, so in the Tailwind CSS, right? For example, you can you can specify what you want to modify, right? So you can, for example, modify the text decoration thickness. For example, if by default one is 3, in your design system you want it to be 3 rems, you can change it from 3 pixels to 3 rems, right? Now by default, every time that you use the text decoration thickness and you apply the 3, it's going to be 3 rems. For padding, for example, if your designer came up with the idea that every padding should be of 4 rems instead of 4 pixels, you don't have to worry about changing the original value with a new name. You can just keep the same name of the margin being 4, so M-4, and you're just modifying the original value of the 4. So instead of being 4 pixels, you change it to rems. So that's a way of customizing and changing the configuration of your Tailwind CSS. So that's definitely doable. So with that being said, I'm gonna open the floor for any questions that you guys may have.
Hello, Patricio. Welcome back to the studio. Really amazing talk. I especially like that you use Visual Studio Code. It's also my editor of choice.
Hey, we're friends now.
Yeah, of course, we were ever. So let's jump right into some questions, I would say. Maybe starting with a more personal question. How do you started your tech career, if I may ask?
How I started my tech career? Back in the days, when I first moved to the US when I was 14, I lived with a Russian hacker, and his name was Maxim, and he got me inspired of technology, and that's how I started learning how to code with Visual Studio. With Visual Basic 6.0. Yeah, that's what I started with, and then from there I decided that I love technology, and I actually changed my majors because I was bio nanotechnology, and then I realized what I really liked was programming, so I changed it to computer science.
Thank you for these insights. Maybe another question. Mark wants to know, have you experienced any negative things about Tailwind CSS? Maybe some painful workarounds or something? Yes. Okay.
Yes. Well, I wouldn't say painful workarounds, but in my personal point of view, one of the negative sides from Tailwind is that it's not for people who are not familiar with CSS. So some people jump into Tailwind without understanding CSS, and they hate Tailwind because they think Tailwind is very complicated because they don't understand what's happening behind the scenes. So in my personal point of view, that's the reason why I say Tailwind should be used for design systems. That way, people can use your custom components that you already made for them, and they just plug and play. Or for people who are familiar with CSS, because you have to have the ability to debug Tailwind CSS in case there's a mistake, which I haven't run into one, but I'm pretty sure there's plenty because we're humans and we make mistakes. So like I said, I don't think it's a tool that people who don't have that much CSS experience should use from scratch. Why? Because I want them to learn the basics. I'm not keeping you from using Tailwind CSS, use it. Maybe you can learn in a different way. Maybe you can use like doing the reverse engineering, applying the CSS classes that Tailwind gives you, and then looking at the actual value and see, okay, this class right here. So for example, let's go to the logo, and then we click on this part right here, and then you can see, okay, the animation dash polls, and then you do the reverse engineering and you see the actual values. That could work for you, but I mean, I think that would be a little bit of time consuming, but feel free to use it that way if you want to learn CSS.
Yeah, the CSS syntax isn't the most difficult one, so try it and it will work, I promise. So maybe another question, another personal question, if I may ask. What was your first computer or machine you've worked with? Do you remember?
I don't remember, but I do remember what I did with it.
Okay.
Yeah, so I was so curious about how the computers looked from the inside. So I actually opened it up, and it was the computer that my dad handled me because he got a new computer, and he gave me this like old computer for me to play Age of Empires, a classic. And just a fact about me, I'm still playing Age of Empires nowadays, FYI. 20 years later, I'm still playing, yeah.
Or 4.
And,
currently there's a 4th one.
Oh, I still use the classic one on Steam, which is the Age of Empires 2. That's the one I like to play, but good to know that there's a new version. So I opened the computer, put everything apart, and put it back together just to see how everything was working. And guess what? It didn't work.
I can relate.
After a few tries, I got it working, but yeah, it wasn't working the first time. So of course I freaked out because what I'm gonna tell my dad? I just broke the computer that you just gave me. So yeah, fun story.
But as everything, it's a learning.
Yeah, everything's a learning experience. Yeah.
I can so much relate to that. Talking about family
we're
computers
engineers,
and butchering them especially.
Yeah, that's what we do. We break things and we fix them, right?
Yeah, right. So, I just got a question from Giga. Also, Bootstrap has utilities and helpers, and you can configure them. What is benefit if you compare Bootstrap? So, what are the benefits of?
That's a very good question. So, let me tell you that I'm not here to tell you to use Tailwind over Bootstrap. I think Bootstrap is an amazing tool. I haven't used it in a long time. Why? And I'm gonna tell you the why. When I started working with Angular, and Bootstrap came out with their npm package for integrating Bootstrap into Angular applications, they were using jQuery still on the background, and that's just a no-no. And by that time, we were like, okay, we don't want to use a tool that is using jQuery in the background. We're gonna switch to PrimeNg, which PrimeNg is a library component. And then eventually, Bootstrap released their npm package without using jQuery. But for me, it was too late, so I have never gotten back to it. I mean, maybe just let's go to Bootstrap and let's learn everyone at the same time. Bootstrap, that's how you call it, right? Yeah, it's Bootstrap. I'm pretty sure this is the website. And then let's go to Docs. And I just want to click on, I don't know, content. Let's click on images and image fluid. Let's see. Let's do Flex. Let's see how easy it is to integrate Flex. Let's look at that. So I'm assuming the Flex. I don't know what that is. Okay. Apply the display. I'm assuming it means display flex, the D. So it looks very similar. Yeah, flex row, given the direction, flex column. I mean, it's probably the same in some facts. Tailwind became very popular. So, like I said, use whatever you prefer. I'm not going to tell you which one is better because I don't think that's fair.
The meme same but different comes to mind when comparing them.
Yeah.
So maybe as a last questions, do we have any further resources you want to share with us? Well,
first of all, if you're going to jump into Tailwind definitely use the Tailwind CSS official website. And then if you want to follow along and documentation, if you are using an Angular version lower than 11.2, feel free to use my guide. If you're using an Angular version greater or equal to 11.2, you can use my guide as well. I teach you both ways of doing it. Other than that, just rely on Tailwind docs. I mean, they're pretty good. I show you how to use them during my talk, and I don't think there's a better way of learning Tailwind than the official docs.
Okay, Patricio, thank you so much for this insight. Thank you so much for the really amazing talk. And I hope tomorrow you won't need 20 alarm clocks. And have a nice day. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye. So this was our second speaker. And before we jump to the last of the day, we'll have a short break of about 10 minutes. Stay tuned.
Have you found your dream job as a developer? Or are you stuck in an unfulfilling job? On WeAreDevelopers.com, you find over 1,000 jobs in Europe that fit the tech stack that you want to work with, and salaries go up to $130K. All you have to do is create a free profile, and you automatically get matched with jobs that fit your requirements. So what are you waiting for? Create your free profile and let companies apply to you now.
Hi guys, and welcome back to the WeAreDevelopers live Angular Day. We jump right into the last part and the last talk of our topic day. Our guest will be Marko Stanimirović. He is Senior Frontend Engineer at JobCloud and a member of the NgRx team. So please welcome with me, Marko.
Hello, Benedikt.
Hello, Marko. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How about you?
I'm fine too. Thank you very much. So good to have you. Marko, I know that you're the organizer of the Angular Belgrade group. Is that correct?
Yes.
Oh, so awesome. We had some very cool cooperations in the past. Thank you for that at this part. And if you're on the Belgradian area and like Angular, feel free to reach out to Marko. So, Marko, back to topic. What are we going to learn from you today?
Yeah, so I'm going to show you some tips and best practices for using NgRx packages, namely for NgRx store and NgRx effects packages. So that tips can be useful to improve code quality, performance, and maintainability in Angular projects.
Marko, that sounds awesome. I'm very hyped, and I would say the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so as I said, today I'm going to be talking about NgRx. And before we start, let me quickly introduce myself. So my name is Marko Stanimirović. I'm a senior front-end engineer at JobCloud, member of NgRx team, and organizer of Angular Belgrade meetups. And in my spare time, I'm also a hobby musician. You can find me on Twitter at MarkoSTDev. So as you probably know, there are two core NgRx packages for the global state management, NgRx store and NgRx effect. And today we will take a closer look at both of them. Namely, we will walk through the list of tips and best practices for using these packages. And let's first start with NgRx store. So here you can see the entire list of tips that we will explore today. For each tip, you will also see the example in order to better understand its importance. The tip number one is to put global state in a single place. So if you are already using NgRx as a global state management solution, then don't split your global state between NgRx store and stateful services. Try to keep the NgRx store as the only source of your global state. And let's now see the example. So imagine that we have a songs component, which is a container component. And in this component, we want to display songs with composers collection. So we need to create this songs with composers observable somehow. On the other hand, from state perspective, there is a songs service, which is a stateful service. And we also have NgRx store with composers feature state. So to create songs with composers observable, we will use combine latest operator from RxJS package, and then we will combine songs observable from song service, and we will select composers from the NgRx store. And then we need to apply a mapping logic in order to append composer to each song. However, this approach has several drawbacks. because, for example, this songs with composers observable is not reusable, right? What if we want to display the same data in another component? With this approach, we actually need to copy the entire combined latex expression to another component. Also, with this approach, we can end up with many dependencies in our component, because what if, again, for example, we want to consume the state from another stateful services? With this architecture, we actually need to inject that service as well. So to get rid of these drawbacks, we can do something to improve this, of course. And if you asked me several years ago how we can improve this code, I will probably tell you, create a facade and move combine latest call along with mapping logic to the facade. And then we can simply, in our songs component, we can now get rid of all other dependencies, inject only the facade, and use songs with composers observable. However, facades have their own drawbacks, because with facades, you will have additional layer for testing and maintaining in your application. Also with facades, you can easily end up with unnecessarily boilerplate code. Because what if, for example, we want to dispatch the action to the NgRx store when some event occurs in our songs component? With the current architecture to do that, we actually need to create additional method in songs facade that will dispatch the action to the NgRx store and then call that method from the songs component, right? Because we cannot dispatch the action to the NgRx store directly from the songs component, because we have only a facade as a dependency in our component. So to solve this drawbacks, to get rid of these drawbacks, actually, we can simply move our global state from the song service to the NgRx store. And if we do that, this is how our global state will look like. So we will have two feature state, songs feature state, and composers feature state. And now we can create select songs with composers selector by combining select all songs that returns an array of songs, and select composers that returns dictionary of composers. And now we can apply the mapping logic in order to append, again, a composer to each song. And now if we go back to our component, we can now again get rid of facade, so we can inject again the store and use these select songs with composers selector in order to select songs with composer and display them in the template. Okay, so the next tip is to use selectors for derived state. In other words, don't put derived state in the store. Here you can see the musicians reducer, and here we have a case reducer that listens to the search action to be dispatched. And when this action is dispatched, we are first calculating the value of filter musicians array, and then we are updating our state, our musicians feature state, with the latest value of query and filter musicians. But if we take a closer look here, you can notice that our filter musicians property is actually derived from two state properties. It's derived from musicians and from query. And this is in general very bad practice to put derived state to the NgRx store. So to get rid of derived state from the NgRx store, so yeah, just to mention the drawbacks of this approach. So if we decide to keep our derived state in NgRx store, we need to take care of this filter musicians variable. We need to update the filter musician in every case, in each case reducer where musicians property or query property is changed. Also, our state will be larger because we will have additional property in our state. So to get rid of these drawbacks, we can simply create a selector for calculating the value of filter musicians. This selector will be created by combining select all musicians and select musician query. and then we can apply the filtering logic. Now this selector can be used directly in components or in NgRx effects. It can be also used to create another selector. And if we go back to our reducer now, you can see that it looks much better. It's more readable, of course, simpler and easier for testing. The next tip for today is to use view model selectors. Use view model selectors to make container components simpler. And here you can see the example of container component where we select several state slices from the NgRx store, and then we are visualizing them, we are displaying them in the template. And you probably saw similar container components in many NgRx tutorials, and this approach is completely fine. However, it also has several drawbacks. First of all, the size of our component class will increase by the number of required state slices. Also, the testing will be a bit harder because there can be many selectors to mock, right? And in our template, you can see that we have several subscriptions. We are using async pipe multiple times. So to get rid of these drawbacks, we can create a view model selector by combining all needed state slices for the particular container. So in this example, we will combine select filter musicians, select musician query, and select active musician selector. And then we will return all these properties of these state slices in a single object that is called the view model object. And now if we go back to our component, you can see that we now only have a single view model property that is created by using select musicians page view model selector. And now if we go back to our template, you can notice that it's now wrapped with ng container, and there is only a single subscription to the VM observable. And now we can also easily access to the view model properties by using the VM alias. So as you saw, it looks now much better. The size of our component is not that big. Testing is also a bit easier, and there is a single subscription in the template. The next tip for today is to create reusable reducers. Keep in mind that case reducers can listen to multiple actions. And you can see that in this example. So here we are listening to 3 actions in our case reducer, and we are performing the same state change. However, what if at some point of time we get a new feature request from our manager and we realize that some of these 3 actions now requires different state change? Let's imagine that, for example, can activate action now requires different state change. In that case, never do something like this. So don't add additional conditioning logic in your case reducer based on the action type. It would be much better actually to create another case reducer and move can activate action along with its specific state changing logic to the new case reducer. And now, as you can see, we have 2 case reducers, but both of them looks much better. Of course, they are easier for maintenance and for testing. And the next tip is to treat actions as unique events. And this is also known as good action hygiene. In other words, don't treat actions as commands. And here you can see the example of, again, our songs container component. It's a bit simpler. Here we are displaying the songs collection in the template, and in order to fetch the songs collection, we are dispatching a load songs action in ngOnInit method. And here we actually dispatch a command. You can recognize commands by their type. So in the square brackets, there is the name of the feature state that particular command affects. And the second part of the command type is actually the command name. And commands can be defined for simple and isolated features. However, what if, for example, in this example, we want to display the songs along with composers, like in our first example, if you remember. If we treat actions as commands, here we need to dispatch another command in order to load composers from the API, right? Under the hood, load composers effect will listen to this action and it will fetch composers collection from the API. And here you can notice that we are now dispatching two actions sequentially, which brings us to one very important rule that says don't dispatch multiple actions sequentially. Don't dispatch multiple actions sequentially because they can cause minor performance issues. They can also lead to some inconsistent intermediate states. But the most important thing is that this is the bad architectural decision. It would be much better actually to dispatch the single action from our engine method to dispatch the unique event, which indicates that our songs page is opened. And here is another very important rule. Be consistent in naming actions, use source event pattern. Also be descriptive in naming actions. It can help a lot in application maintenance, especially for catching bugs. And if we go back to our example, you can see that the source of our action is songs page, because this action is dispatched from the songs page, right? And the name of the event is opened because this action will be dispatched when songs page is opened. And here we come to another advantage of applying good action hygiene. So in this example, if we take a look at the action log, if we open Redux DevTools, when good action hygiene is applied, we can easily conclude what happens in our app without checking the code base, right? So here we know that user first submitted login form, the login page, then Auth API responded that user is logged in successfully. After that, user opened a songs page, and then songs and composers are loaded from the API. Unfortunately, this is not the case with commands, because commands can be dispatched from multiple places. They are reusable, and we never know what is their source. And the last store tip actually for today is also related to the good action hygiene, and it is to group actions by source. In other words, create action file by source. Here you can see the example of songs page actions file, and here we have our opened actions that is used in previous example. Also, we can have other actions, for example, search songs action that will be dispatched, that will be used when search button is clicked, or add composer action in case if we have a song composer form in our songs page. Also, we will have songs API actions that will be used from songs API effects, of course. And if you're already familiar with good action hygiene, you probably saw these two types, let's say, of action files. First is for container components, and the second one is for our API actions, actually. But NgRx actions can be also dispatched from other parts of our Angular applications. For example, we can dispatch the action from guards. And here you can see the example of composer exists guard actions file, where we have can activate action, and this action will be dispatched when can activate method of composer exists guard is called. Okay, so we come to the end for the NgRx store tips, and now we will move to the NgRx effects package. So here you can see the entire list. It's a bit shorter than the list with the store tips. The tip number one is to name effects like functions. In other words, don't name effects based on the action they are listening to. And here you can see the NgRx effect that will display success alert when composer is created successfully. But if we take a closer look at the effect name, we cannot conclude that, right? Because the name is the same as the action it listens to. It will be much better actually to name effect like function. And if we do that, this is how our name will look like. So the name will be show save composer success alert or display save composer success alert. And now when we name effects like functions, our effects will be also in accordance with open-closed solid principle. We can now listen to another action. In this example, we can listen to updated success action in order to display the same success alert, and there is no need to change the effect name anymore. And the next tip is to keep effects simple. Keep effects simple by moving the business logic to services. Here you can see one large and unreadable effect. Let's quickly see what it does. So first, we are listening to the opened actions from musician details page to be dispatched. Then we are selecting musician ID from route. And then we are fetching musician from the API by musician ID. However, this get musician endpoint doesn't return all musician properties required in our application, so we need to trigger another endpoint. In this example, we are calling musicians resource.getBand in order to fetch the band from the API because we need a band name for each musician in our application. And then based on the API responses, we are returning success or failure action. And as I said, this is a large and unreadable effect. You probably saw the larger ones, me too, but we can also make this one to look much better. We can actually move this highlighted part, so we can move this fetching logic from the NgRx effect to the service method. So to do that, we can create a musician service. First, we need to inject the musician's resource and band's resource. By the way, I'm using a resource suffix for the plain HTTP Angular services. So here we will have a get musician method that returns a musician by ID with all required properties. And if we go back now to our effect, we can now replace this highlighted part of code with a single service call. So musician service.getMusician. And as you can see, our effect is now pretty straightforward. It's of course easier for testing and for reading. So the next tip is don't create boiler effects. Don't create boiler effects because NgRx effect can listen to multiple events, can listen to multiple actions. And this is what I call boiler effect. So here we are listening to two actions, current page change and page size change, and we are dispatching another action when some of these two actions is dispatched. On the other hand, there is another effect called load musicians, and in this effect we are listening to this action and we are fetching musician collection from the API. And as you can see now, we have two effects, but actually there is no need for the invoke load musicians effect. There is no need for boiler effect. We can get rid of invoke load musicians effect simply by moving our off type from invoke load musicians to load musicians. And if we do that, we will now have less code, of course. We will now have only one NgRx effect, but the behavior in our application will remain the same. And the last tip for today is to apply good action hygiene to the NgRx effects as well. In other words, don't return an array of actions, don't return an array of commands from the NgRx effect. And we actually, here in this effect, we are returning an array of actions from this NgRx effect. Let's quickly again see what this effect does. So here we are listening to the opened action from musician details page to be dispatched, then selecting album ID from the route, and then we are fetching the album from the API. And album as a data structure contains two collections. There is a songs collection and composers collection. So here we are returning load song success action that will update the song's feature state, and then we are returning or dispatching load composer success action that will update composer's feature state. But actually, there is no need to return here an array of actions. We can apply good action hygiene to the effects as well. And here we can simply return the single action. We can return a unique event that indicates that the album is loaded successfully. And we can pass songs and composers as a payload of this action. And now if we go back to our reducers, you can see that now songs reducer and composers reducer listen to the same action, but in songs reducers, we take songs collection to update the songs feature state, and the same is for composers. Okay, so we come to the end, and before I end up for today, I just want to conclude. So as you saw, there are many ways to implement the same functionality with NgRx. However, some of the ways have emerged over time as best practices, and you should consider applying them in your project to increase code quality, maintainability, and performance in your Angular applications. Thank you very much for attention.
Hello, Marko. Welcome back to the studio.
Hello.
Very, very interesting talk. You have a really pleasant presentation style, if I might say. It's intriguing, but at the same time, easy to follow. It was really nice hearing you.
Thank you very much.
So I would suggest to jump right into some questions. Maybe also to you, why Angular? Why no other framework?
Maybe because I worked as a backend developer before, and it was easier for me to switch to the front end with Angular. But also, I'm a big fan of reactive programming, and Angular uses RxJS by default, so I like that part as well. By the way, I also like React. React is also cool, but I prefer Angular.
Okay. Thank you very much. So maybe also a question to you, how did your tech career start? Or what were your first points?
Yeah, I started working as after my studies. I started working at SAP as a full stack developer. I worked on Java, then started with Angular. So that was my start.
Okay, do you remember your first computer or your first machine you worked on?
Yes. It was Pentium 2, I think. Not sure.
Okay, very interesting. So maybe do you have any further resources to share with us? Blogs, books, YouTubers?
Yeah, sure. I wrote also a blog post on this topic. You can find it on dev2/Marko Stanimirović. It contains this list of tips, but also there are some other tips for using NgRx store and NgRx effects packages.
Okay, thank you very much, Marko. And guys, don't forget, if you're in the Belgradian area and the front-end developer, reach out to him. Marko, thank you for speaking to us today, and have a nice day.
Thank you very much. See you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye. So now that our topic day is almost done, another quick reminder from me to go to worldcongress.dev to get some more information about our upcoming World Congress in Berlin. So, and What's now left to say is thank you to all of you for being part of our community. Thank you so much. Stay techy. And I would love to see you at our Machine Learning Day on the 23rd of March. Bye.
Good morning,
Everything is being influenced by code written by developers.
At some point, you're going to wake up and say, what the hell am I doing?
It's hard to believe. It's the largest group I've ever been in front of, I think.
We develop the future.